welcome to our Curve in Conversation series. I'm really thrilled that today we're with one of our amazing Curve associate artists. You'll know the name Ben Cracknell, but you might not know Ben's face. He is a lighting designer, so his work takes place behind the scenes. And although you see it and you sort of marvel in the beautiful stage pictures that Ben and our designers create, you might not know the face. So we're really thrilled that we're chatting with Ben today. So hello, Ben. Welcome to our Curve in Conversation series.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here. So should we kick off then, sort of looking back a little bit and how your interest in theatre began?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I kind of grew up in the East End of London, and I guess my earliest memories of the theatre is going to see the pantomime, which I'm sure is a lot of people's first memories. So every Christmas we'd go and see the panto at the Theatre Royal Stratford East. And I can remember at that point just being in total awe. I mean, I guess it must be crazy for a kid the first time they see a show. The idea of sitting in the seats and then, oh my word, someone's turned the lights off and then a curtain lifts and everyone's singing and dancing. And I can remember kind of thinking, wow, this is really just incredible. And you know, there was real mystery and magic to that. I can remember, like, I can't remember who it was, but the lead comic riding on stage on a bicycle, and they got off, and then they whistled, and the bike just magically left the stage. So, you know, you and I probably have some ideas about how that would happen. But as a kid, you just think this is mad. I mean, in real life, that doesn't happen. So I can kind of remember that, and the mystery of theatre. Like, I've still got memories of walking back to the car park or wherever we were at the theatre and seeing like the lights of the dressing rooms on and just thinking, wow, like the people have I just seen on stage, they're like up in those rooms or those, you know, behind those curtains. And it was just, it was kind of a real a wonder, I guess, which initially got me hooked. And I mean, at that point, you know, I was, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, something like that. So that's probably my first memory of theatre. And then as things continued, I guess it was at school, especially when I got to secondary school, because we did drama at school as part of the curriculum. It was fantastic, and I can remember like really enjoying those drama classes and being involved with a school musical. And at this point, I didn't know anything about lighting or technical stuff necessarily. I just wanted to be involved. So I was in the school musicals, singing and dancing, and in the local amateur groups as well. I went to a theatre club and just kind of really enjoyed doing shows and being in musicals. I can kind of remember certainly at school that sort of the week leading, because you rehearse these things forever when you're at school during the Christmas show, and like the final week building up where we had a stage in the gym, and you know, they start putting out some more bits of staging in front. And I can remember they must have hired some lights, and you'd see like the drama teacher and maybe the science teacher and a few people starting, you know, winding up stands. And it was just, I guess it's that, like when you see the making of movies and stuff like that, that it was just all of a sudden I was interested in what's all this crazy stuff. And you see the lighting board, and in those days, certainly what we were hiring, it was faders. So you'd see someone push this fader up, and all of a sudden the stage would go red. Or so that kind of, yeah, I think at that stage it really sort of captured my imagination.
And when did you sort of become aware that there was this person, this role called a lighting designer, who was responsible for when you, as you say, you put up that fader, the stage becomes red and it completely changes the sort of mood and atmosphere of the scene?
Well, I guess, I don't know, I sort of naively, I didn't necessarily, I'm trying to think when. I guess probably the next step actually is when I was at secondary school, we got to probably the year or so before GCSEs, where you had to go and do work experience. At this point, I thought, well, I want to go and do work experience in the theatre. But rather than do in my local theatre, I set my sights big and said, right, I'm going to the West End, and where better than one of the biggest theatres in the West End, which was the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. And I did work experience there, and at the time, Miss Saigon was playing. And I can remember on the first, we were in there for a week, and I think the week was kind of peppered in that, like you do one day with the front of house staff, maybe in box office, one day with the electricians and the carpenters and wardrobe and so on. But the first night, I remember I just watched the show, and that was the first time I'd seen anything like that. I mean, that scale of West End musical. I mean, I was just pinned to my seat with excitement. I mean, it was insane. And at that point, the lighting, I'd become aware of the lighting more so, and I can remember at that point getting a program and just starting to take notice, because I mean, we all get these programs at the theatre, but actually turning past the sort of the centre pages and past the stars, and you suddenly see there's this enormous list of people who all contribute to this production, and heading up those, everyone has their departments, and the lighting designer, I mean, David Hersey was the lighting designer on Miss Saigon, and actually at the time he was a lighting designer on pretty much everything in the West End. I mean, he was prolific in terms of Cats and Starlight Express and Jesus Christ Superstar, and like so much work. But I guess probably the experience on Miss Saigon was the first time I realised that there was a role of a lighting designer. And I guess coming back to school at the time, and this was pre-GCSEs, it was at that point I knew I wanted to somehow probably go into lighting, but certainly go into a design discipline in theatre, as opposed to attempting to dance, which, believe me, you don't want to see that. So I think it's best.
Oh, I think we do. I think we feel we've missed out on not seeing your.
I haven't warmed up this morning, so I can't possibly do it.
Oh, life is full of disappointments at the moment, isn't it?
We'll have to do another one on my dance career. That's the only way.
Great. So how did you, when you sort of got that, so you're starting to get this insight of these different roles, and you've identified that you want to sort of go into a design discipline, how did you then start to sort of formalise that and start to sort of embark on, what has been a very successful career?
Well, it's a tricky one. It was quite tricky. I guess schools, it's a bit of a, theatre's one thing, I guess, and it's quite tangible, that acting and so on, like when you start talking to careers advisors and so on, whereas lighting design is such a specific field to try to get into. So I came back, as I say, having had an amazing time in London and heading into my GCSEs, and so the next step was I went on to do A-levels after that. So I did, at the time, actually, I thought maybe I'd be interested in directing as well at the time. And that informed my choices, in that when I did A-levels, I did English literature, theatre studies and psychology, with a view to I thought they'd all be useful things. They'd all be useful things. So I went on to do A-levels, and certainly the theatre studies in particular meant that, as well as doing modules where there was stuff based on play reading and also a bit of directing, there was design. And I think that I was interested in that. And my tutor at the time, she was fantastic, and she really sort of helped me and facilitated sort of pushing me into playing. We had a studio theatre, so I could get more involved with the lighting, and at that point started lighting shows, not only as part of the theatre studies course, but for other, there was a drama group at the college, so I would like their stuff. And so I kind of studied that, and I think at that point I was becoming more and more sort of drawn into the world of lighting design. And so I thought, well, I'd probably need to go and study it somewhere. So it was a case of just researching. So I looked at various colleges, from Bretton Hall, who ran technical courses at the time, and Rose Bruford, and I ended up settling on Rose Bruford, where I did the degree lighting design course. So I applied to that, and initially I didn't get accepted. I got accepted to Bretton Hall, but I wanted to hold out for Rose Bruford, so I decided I was going to take a year out. So at the end of my A-levels, I just took a year out, and with a view to I'll reapply in a year's time, but also get some experience. And in that year, firstly, I got a job as a theatre technician in the college that I'd done my A-levels. So all this theatre, I suppose it's fortuitous that the person had left. So I took that role, which meant I could continue, because basically I was just given a small studio theatre to play with for a year. That was fantastic. And I also then applied to my local regional theatre, which is a receiving house, the Cliffs Pavilion in Southend. And now they don't produce their own stuff, but they get a lot of touring musicals in. And certainly in that year, there were musicals like the big, really useful group, Jesus Christ Superstar, toured through there. We had the Buddy, Boogie Nights. I mean, Joseph and Mason Technicolor Dreamcoat. There was a whole load of big musicals. that went through. So not only did I get experience installing these shows at that scale, and also earn some money from them, at the same time I was also then working in this college theatre where perhaps I could experiment more as a lighting designer, as well as facilitating the work of the students. I could kind of also facilitate sort of my own growth as a lighting designer and just experiment and learn. So that happened for a year, at the end of which I reapplied to Rose Bruford and got in, and then did 3 years at Rose Bruford, down in Sidcup in Kent. Well, at the time, the technical courses were in Deptford, but the main campus is in Kent. But we sort of spent some time between both of them, which worked really well. And what was great about Rose Bruford is, so I was living in southeast London, but again, we all have to earn money and get a job. So I went and applied to a load of West End theatres to try to get jobs, either as stage crew, just moving scenery, or lighting, operating follow spots. The first job I got was stage crew on Grease, which at the time was running at the Cambridge Theatre. So literally pushing trucks on and off stage, as in big lumps of scenery on and off stage. But then the second job I got was back to the Theatre or Drury Lane to work on the crew on Miss Saigon, which was a fantastic experience, because all of a sudden, having been so inspired at the age of probably 15, 16, something like that, here I was back actually earning some money in this theatre now, working on the show that had inspired me. So yeah, that's got a very long-winded answer, but that's sort of how I got from work experience to actually working at the same theatre, which had inspired me all those years ago.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. And it feels for all of us, whether it's a director, a lighting designer, an actor, having an appreciation and an understanding of all the different roles, all the different departments is really, well, it's vital, isn't it? Because theatre is such a technical exercise in many ways, and being able to articulate, whether it's a director's point of view asking for a lighting thing or a sound effect or, you know, a piece of automation, I think having that language and appreciation is so important.
Oh, completely. And I think it's, I mean, there's lots of routes you can take to being a lighting designer, but I think some of the strongest and the best lighting designers are the ones who have worked their way in some way through the ranks of lighting, because it's not, we can all conjure up like amazing ideas of what you want to do, but you have to really have an understanding of how those ideas have formed and how they're created technically. Because, I mean, also the bottom line in theatre, be it regional theatre or commercial theatre, is that budgets are budgets and resources are finite. So when I look at something creative, I need to weigh up, yes, it might be an amazing effect or an amazing moment, but as part of my budget, I need to think, well, can I afford the equipment to do it? But also, how long will it take to install it? Have we got the time to use it to its best ability? And having, knowing that, I've rigged lamps in ridiculous places at the top of scaff towers and on trusses and so forth, is if I've got a very, if I've got a difficult demand to place a light, I need to think to myself, well, of course we all want that to happen, but how much time have we got to do it? And what is the impact of that particular light that might take someone in a harness to climb up to a crazy part of the ceiling to do it? Is the payoff extraordinary? In which case, that's great. But if the payoff isn't that extraordinary actually, or I don't have confidence in it, I mean, the trade-off of spending all that time putting that one light there is that maybe then the next bit of the show you need to do really quickly and with hardly anything. So you just need to know that it's going to be worth doing that. And I think the only way of knowing that is having an experience of how long things take. Or if you want to, say we're in the middle of a technical rehearsal, and something's not working, there's a shadow on the stage, or we're not getting the best out of the lighting, and maybe the solution is, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to move that lighting bar, and everyone looks absolutely shocked and thinks you're a lunatic. But we only ever request that at the point that I've sat there and gone, okay, well, do you think it's acceptable to stay like this? Or is it worth saying, we've got an hour that we could be programming some more lighting or getting ahead on a scene, but actually is it better to say, stop right here for a second, I just need to sort this bit out first? And how long is it going to take to do that? And having done that before, I can say to a crew, look, I completely understand this is going to be really hard work. We're going to have to move some scenery and do this. But believe me, I'm in my head, I've looked at my budget in terms of the time it's going to take you, and I've weighed up, and I know that the gains from this are going to be worth it. And I know that from experience. So I think it's really important to have an understanding of how it all comes together.
Yeah, and I think it's so important, isn't it? If there is something that's not quite right, if it's not quite right at the beginning of the tech, by the end of the tech, it will just be a nightmare, which is causing problems all over the place. And I think, like you, in my experience, if something's not quite right, you must never settle. And no matter how painful it is, you need to get it sorted out, because that will then inform how the rest of the process runs. It will be smoother. Artistically, it will be stronger. And so just sort of finishing off your sort of launch into sort of the industry then, once you'd graduated and you'd crewed on, Grease at the Cambridge and back at Drury Lane with Miss Saigon, how did you then make that leap into becoming a lighting designer in your own right?
Well, it was kind of, it's sort of, I guess, relatively unconventional in that I started, it was a lot of it's to do with contacts. So there were already, I mean, one of my first design jobs was lighting a pantomime, and how that came about is that the production manager of the pantomime producer happened to have, obviously at the Christian South End we'd done pantos, and I'd been on the lighting desk, I'd been the board op and the programmer, and I'd expressed interests in doing that. And I think at one time or another, someone might have dropped out of a show or something, and it was just literally I bumped into this guy in the West End, actually in Covent Garden, and he said, and I explained I'd been away, done this lighting course, done all that, and he basically said, all right, well, do you want to come to the Pavilion Theatre in Bournemouth and light Aladdin this Christmas? So I kind of almost like fell into it. Of course, that's what I wanted to do, but so that was like one of the, we're talking back in the year, Christmas 2000, that would have been, lighting Aladdin with Jeremy Beadle in it, of all people. So so that was one of the breaks into lighting design, the early jobs. But on my route, I kind of went through a stage of being a lighting programmer as opposed to a lighting designer. So I did a lot, certainly in television. I worked for a lighting company called PRG, as part of one of their regular staff. But as a result of that, I met a lighting designer called Al Gurdon, who lights a lot of big epic television, from Olympic ceremonies to the Brit Awards and so on. And so I did an awful lot of stuff with him as a programmer, only in television, but working on shows like the Brit Awards. We did a Eurovision Song Contest in Russia in 2007, I think it was. So that gave me some experience, because television lighting design is a little different in that the programmer has a lot more input, I think, in television. And
what does a programmer do, for those watching who aren't sure about that term or what that means?
Oh, sorry, yes. So a lighting system, obviously you have your group of lights, and ultimately you end up with there's a computer, the lighting board, which controls all these lights. Every light is essentially given a number. And what the lighting programmer does is exactly that, is operates that board. So by selecting lights by their given number, you can, in the case of what we consider to be old-fashioned static theatre lights, you just turn them on or off, or set levels. But with automated lighting, with moving lights, you can position them, colour them, and then you can record the scenes. So create a big yellow look and record that as Q1, and then the next scene might go blue, and that's Q2, and therefore you can, scene by scene, you can change the lighting. And certainly the stuff I was doing in television was a lot of music television. So if you can imagine those big concerts, we did lots of yellows and reds and all of those kind of big things. So a lot of my work to begin with was based in, or certainly the work that made me money was based in television and in programming those events, which were fantastic, because the scale of, I remember doing the concert for Diana at Wembley Stadium, and it was just an extraordinary event, because there were so many sort of stars on that show. It was wonderful, but at the same time, I was also then trying to get work in theatre. So doing sort of small fringe shows at the same time, still going back actually and lighting the amateurs back in Southend, because I'd made a name for myself and I'd gone away to that London and done the lighting course. I could then, go and light Kiss Me Kate or whatever for the amateur dramatics. So sort of, I suppose, keeping the tools sharp at the same time. So it was a case of sort of building up through crazy commercial things like doing pantomimes, but then doing, I did like a show at the Palace in Westcliff, a small Agatha Christie season. Now that happened to be produced by Bill Kenwright's. I mean, I'd done the small studio play, but from that I met, the director was a chap called Keith Strachan, whose major fame is from composing the music for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, but equally he's a musical supervisor and directs, or at the time was directing stuff for Bill Kenwright's. So from doing this itty bitty little Agatha Christie play in the studio, the next thing he asked me to do was, I did Tommy, the UK tour of that for Bill Kenwright's, a show called Dancing in the Streets, which toured the UK, and actually, funnily enough, then went to the Cambridge Theatre in the West End and played there. So I think by doing these kind of strangely sort of mixed up different things, all of a sudden you find yourself working with a designer who then asks you to do something else. So the designer on Dancing in the Streets asks me to light a play called African Snow he was doing at York Theatre Royal. So I started there, and then that transferred down to the Trafalgar Studios in London. And there's a kind of, I guess, a snowball effect really to getting into this and making those connections. And that, yeah, you work with one director here who, but then the director's designer then takes you on and you meet a new director, and then maybe the producer likes you, so then the producer pairs you with a different director, and it sort of works like that.
Brilliant. And can you talk a little bit then about that relationship with the director and the designer, and how that sort of evolves really from you reading the script in the first instance to those early design meetings, and how you start to imagine how your lighting will create a look and a feel for a piece?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess the tricky thing about lighting is that generally it's one of the last things to the party, because you know, like many months out, potentially, directors and designers can certainly sit down and start talking about a production, and can work up model boxes, and the model box being a small miniature model of the set. Can look at costumes, sketches. People can be in the rehearsal room for several weeks, whereas as a lighting designer, you kind of the front end of lighting design potentially is just a production week, and actually if you gnaw it down to anything, the most of the lighting happens in several minutes when you've stopped a technical rehearsal and everyone is waiting for you. So and that's quite a daunting prospect. So I think the only way to overcome that, and certainly how I work, and I think probably how most lighting designers work, is you need to get on board as soon as possible in a production. Whilst you can't offer up any lighting, I'm not going to show up to a model box with a load of theatre lights, but you really need to get under the skin of the project. And I think the only way to do that is right from the very beginning, because when you're making those decisions in, how long is it going to be, Ben, for pausing the company because we need to know if we need to break the crew? Well, in those 3 minutes, you already need to have all the information that perhaps has been grown in a set model over weeks and weeks and weeks. And you need to understand what the language of the production is, what the aesthetic, what the director's going for, what the costume designer hoped that their wonderful red velvet costume would look like under light. You need to have an understanding of that so you can really quickly get hold of that. So I think collaboration is key. So I think I'll read the script, but I won't really have any opinion about it. I mean, I'm someone, what I really love is sitting to hear a cast read a script, which is not to say I can't read. Although, no, I love hearing it come to life. I'm just not, I struggle sometimes to read a script and really understand the characters and unpick it. Some scripts vary. But actually, the first read of a script, the next thing I want to do is just talk to a director and talk to a designer and kind of think, what do you think about this? What are your feelings before we worry about colours of lights or any of that stuff? just to kind of get an understanding of it. And the more, especially like today in the days of Pinterest and things like that, where you can share images collectively over those things, be it mood board images. Now, you could be, I often say to designers, can you just send me all the mood board images? And it doesn't have to be lighting pictures, because in a way lighting pictures are irrelevant, but I just want to know what the texture of the show is, what does it feel like, because that's ultimately going to inform my decisions, as I say, in those 3 minutes of tech stoppage several months later. And then from there, we can start looking at a set model and getting an understanding of what the environment that the show, the play, the musical is going to be in. And at the same time, that's also useful because, not naming names, but lots of set designers like to put lots of scenery in and not allow any space for any lights, which is often, so there can sometimes be some territory discussions, and heavens forbid people put ceilings on. We won't even talk about that right now. But understanding, trying to work out how you're going to light a show, because I think part of being a lighting designer, we all want it to look fantastic, and you can have creative arguments in the theatre. Equally, you need to have those creative arguments, discussions earlier, because as much as turning the wrong light on, it can be a problem for the lighting design. Not speaking up if you say, look, I'm really sorry, but if this is the set light as it is, I just can't get a light to the person stood up stage by the doorway. There's no way. Well, that observation and that note given months out is as valid, if not, it's actually probably the more important than the decision of saying, turn on these lights and those lights and record that as a cue. Because if you haven't got that first bit right, or you haven't stood up or pointed out that there's going to be a problem, a bit like what you said about fixing a problem in a show as soon as possible, it will all just unravel, because you'll always be tripping over that problem that you haven't picked up on a model box months ago. So involvement in terms of the design is so important at an early stage. And then, of course, it develops as we start to get into rehearsals, and you see how the space is used and the staging is. I'm very responsive, I think, to seeing stuff and just coming up with a gut in. As for all of that preparation I've just spouted on about, actually, there's nothing better sometimes than you see something in a rehearsal and you go, I can see this picture immediately. It might ultimately not be the picture we end up with by the time the show gets locked, but certainly to begin with, to see I don't know, a bit of staging, be it a strong diagonal bit of staging, and I think, well, I know I'm going to put an enormous light up there, and we're going to blast across the stage, and we'll just tickle a bit of light in on people's faces, and that's really exciting. But that's a response that comes, much later in the process, having already had those discussions about where we put lights on the set and looked at images. And I think, go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it's the constant marriage, isn't it, between instinct and sort of prep and technical work. Completely. That's all of our roles, I think, that trusting your instinct, that sort of first initial hit whenever it comes, is so important. But then also doing your homework, whether it's a ground plan or whether it's research as a director, so that the two things are sort of matched, and then you've sort of got your armor, whether you're going into rehearsals or going into tech. And I think it's really interesting what you say about ceilings and all of that sort of thing, because you've done so many incredible shows at Curve and created such sort of incredible stage pictures. The Importance of Being Earnest, which was basically a mirrored box with a ceiling. Legally Blonde, which was a sort of Jeff Koons sort of pink box with a ceiling, albeit a ceiling that moved up and down, but was still a ceiling. Scrooge with Michael Taylor's incredible bridges and sort of, Victorian street walls, which really hemmed the space in. But in each one, you absolutely overcame those sort of challenges and worked very closely with the designer and obviously myself. Do you want to talk a bit about why you enjoy working at Curve and what the theatre means to you?
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. It's a real privilege to be able to work at Curve and to be an associate artist at Curve. It's just such a vibrant building. I think you go in there, like, before we even start talking about making shows or doing anything like that, but it's such a buzz in the building. You walk in and you'll find that there's a show playing in the studio, a show playing in the main house, maybe the choir on the mezzanine, someone street dancing halfway around the corridor. And that, and then you go to the rehearsal rooms. It has a real pulse, the building, I always think. So it's great. It's great to go back there. And it's also wonderful now. The more and more photographs that you put on the wall, it's great. It's like a greatest hits. I can sort of walk around and say, yeah, got that one, got that one, got that one. So from that point of view, it's a very exciting building. The team are fantastically welcoming, which I think ultimately the team make a building. And it's great to go back. I went back to see Phantom of the Opera there only a couple of months ago and sort of caught up with the lighting crew. We'll go and grab a coffee and just catch up, because there's just such a wonderful team. And we've done so many shows there. To be honest, I've lost count of how many. But what's also fantastic about Curve is that it serves its community wonderfully. And the audiences love the shows, but equally, the stuff that I've done at Curve, we've been fortunate that has gone on tours around the UK, has been seen Legally Blonde, has gone to Monaco, and perhaps even prouder, the likes of shows like Breakfast at Tiffany's, our shows starting there, touring the country, and then being able to sit in the West End and see it, and see a first night audience up on their feet applauding it. You just think the reach of this theatre is incredible. So it's something to really, I think it's something to be really proud of, that not only is it very, very important to Leicester and the community in Leicester, it's really made its mark on the country. And I wasn't involved in it, but yeah, again, seeing Christmas, sitting in the mighty Dominion Theatre and seeing White Christmas play there, and you think, oh yeah, it's come from that that Leicester place up on the train, and it's extraordinary the work that Curve does. It's great to be part of it.
Well, that's obviously incredible to hear, and it's incredible to hear that. Well, incredible to have you as an integral part of that team. And just thinking about some of the tech rehearsals we've been in, and the sort of pressure to sort of create in the moment, and how lighting can play such an important role. That literally, thinking of maybe Scrooge when we were trying to create a look for Marley's ghost, and literally within the sort of changing the color palette or changing the direction of the light, suddenly that scene takes on a whole new aesthetic. Do you feel that pressure as a lighting designer, that you're suddenly because it feels, sorry, I'm sort of jumbling my questions, asking 17,000 questions all in one go, which is not dissimilar to
it's just like being in tech with you, Nikolai. Yeah, exactly. It's fantastic.
But what I've sort of found over the years is that the way we design productions, that aesthetic has changed. It's not necessarily about bringing in a load of scenery for every new scene. It might be about having an environment where the environment remains more or less consistent throughout the piece, and then the lighting designer has more pressure on them to create different worlds and different locations within an environment. Is that something you've sort of felt over the years recently?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think there was a stage when you go back to like the Miss Saigons and the incredible designs of, you think about, you and I, we did Sunset Boulevard together in an environment, creating these things with light. But you look at the original John Napier design in the West End, and everything was incredibly literal. You had the most sumptuous house that came on the stage for Norma Desmond's apartment, and full cars and so on. And I think production design has changed a bit now to that it's less about having such like every little piece of stuff. And I think what's wonderful about these shows where you're essentially in an environment, be it in the case of Sunset Boulevard, a movie studio, is how much more malleable the space, I guess, is, in that light can absolutely change everything by having some simple scenic ingredients, be it some bits of staircase and a sofa or a chaise longue, that if you put a flat wash of light on it, it looks like nothing. The space just dominates in terms of, you get these big towering walls, but all of a sudden, by pulling the light down and very delicately, be it a little skim of light down the staircase and something that glances across a drape and some candles, you're there. And I think our imagination as audience can dream up the rest of that's everything there, but the intimacy of the lighting and the color that we use, be it like warm candlelit incandescent colors and maybe a bit of cold moonlight, we can tell that story. I mean, everything I've just told you, there might not be actually there doesn't have to be any candles on stage, but the lighting, as I say, a glance of moonlight, well, that's, you know, a light in blue, it's scraping across the space, tells us that storytelling. That tells us that perhaps there's some moonlight. Maybe there's some low level light coming in, as if there's candles at the sides, and you could give it a little flicker or a judder. But again, that's just a light in a warm color doing a little flicker on, you know, control from the lighting board. But immediately the lighting has told you that story without having necessarily a big moon painted on the wall, or you know, we understand that. So, and I think designs that are like that can suddenly be incredibly nimble, because like that, you can be somewhere else. You could, you know, we can be in Norma's in her house at night time, but then with a click of a switch, we could have a big epic light from above, and as if it's a studio work light, and the scene's ended. And we're there, but we haven't had to lose the house, and we haven't had to fly in a not recording sign or whatever it is. But again, the combination of, well, actually, the combination of lighting and also sound design, in terms of maybe doing a big kind of as if a switch has been pulled, has told that story. So design certainly moved to that. I don't think it's daunting. Like strangely, actually, I perhaps find it easier, but I don't know if that's like a control freak of me, thinking, well, actually, then I can just do it all. I'm not having to worry about anyone else anymore. So I don't know, but yes, absolutely, design has certainly moved that way.
And it's lovely. I mean, you cite the example of Sunset Boulevard, but I think we created a similar sort of aesthetic on Breakfast at Tiffany's, and certainly My Beautiful Laundrette that we've just worked on together, where it feels like you're sort of you're sort of creating a live film, because the lighting, as you say, it can sort of offer as a wide shot, and then we might go sort of close down on Danny Mac, and he's outside Norma's house, then he walks around and into the studio, and you sort of follow him, and then the lighting sort of becomes more vast and interior as he walks into the soundstage, and it almost feels like you're painting with light a live film, and it's almost taking on the role of a camera and the editor in a sort of more traditional film convention, and I really find that exciting.
I think that's definitely we're so fortunate that, I mean, you know, lighting design is still a relatively early craft. I mean, we're looking at the 1940s being the beginning of it, really, and in a very crude way, and certainly probably in the last 20 years with the prevalence of automated lighting and better control, that we can really use these tools to tell stories, and not necessarily, I mean, we can absolutely do the shock and awe big rock and roll lighting with it. But equally, we can do just that, in that lighting can act in an editorial basis in terms of showing the close-up, because quite frankly, you know, somewhere like the main space at Curve is 14 meters wide. I mean, it's a football pitch, and it would be very easy on something like Scrooge, for example, to just be like Scrooge's itty-bitty little man, to be dwarfed by the space. Now, which at times you absolutely, you know, when the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come arrives, you want this towering figure on the space and this little man. But equally, when he's there in his bedroom, you need to close down. And in actual fact, the set hasn't particularly changed between both of those things, but the lighting has, and that's what's given you those two environments. It's the editorial use of lighting, I think. I mean, you think about what lighting does, and I think it's exactly that. It's allow the director to guide the audience member editorially. We've already spoken about the storytelling, be it the moonlight defining that it's nighttime. You know, at the same time, we create the mood and the atmosphere. You know, be it that it's is it a friendly comedy? Do we need it? Is it something like What the Butler Saw, where we just want kind of everything lit and it feels sharp, and it's kind of a brutal, bright look? Or equally, is it something like Breakfast at Tiffany's, and we've got the branch of a tree overhead, and we've got a gentle dapple of light, and it feels a lot softer and more friendly and warmer. Again, I mean, you know, lighting is helping to tell that story.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, it's a relatively young sort of practice, if you like, but the technology nowadays, I mean, we're of a similar age, and our generation have really, I mean, we've seen it literally change from those faders when we were in our studio theatres at school or wherever it was, to now where you've got these incredibly sophisticated computers where, you know, with these MIDI tracks and whatnot, you can trigger a sound cue, which through that sound cue, pardon me, the dog's
you trigger the dog barking.
The dog's excited by the prospect of a MIDI cue. You can trigger all of these lighting effects and projection effects and whatnot, which then mean that, again, editorially, as the set's moving, as the actor's moving, or the choreography's going, everything's absolutely being focused and triggered, and the sort of precision of that is really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real gift. What we have now in terms of, you know, MIDI. I mean, MIDI's a thing whereby the sound designer has a sound effect for. So a crude example is you get the sound of a camera flash, and at the same time we do a flash of lights. So that the sound computer sends a signal to the lighting computer to say, trigger that lighting cue that we've recorded on our lighting board at the same time. And that's just the beginning of it. So it's great that our camera flashes happen at the same time, but then you get into time code, whereby a music track on a song in a show, which isn't the, you know, doesn't often, well, won't usually have the vocal on it and probably have not much orchestration, but that acts as a kind of a metronome, a beat, which means that then for every little musical accent or change, you can then attach the lighting. So, you know, some of the shows I've done where you literally got hundreds and hundreds of lighting cues, you can sync it up so it's absolutely specific, and night after night it happens. I mean, it's phenomenal how that works now, to see it play back, especially with a lot of contemporary music and electronic music, to sync up all of those moments is fantastic, and it is a great tool that we can use.
Yeah, and it's ever evolving, isn't it? The technology, are there new bits of kit, new bits of technology that are sort of buzzing around at the moment that you're interested in learning more about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm kind of getting more. We all know about follow spotlights, where you get your operators out front. I mean, they've been with us since I don't know, since probably the vaudeville days.
Well, that's where the term limelight comes from, isn't it?
The limelight, absolutely, exactly that. So we're all aware of these spotlights. But you can have hard circles, which is great, and it has a cabaret feel, and a lot of concerts have them. Whereas, you know, a lot of contemporary theatre is perhaps a softer accent. But to go another step further is you can make automated follow spot systems now, where you have like a little transmitter tag which you can hide in a costume somewhere, and you can then by setting up the lighting system in a certain way, then all your automated lights in the lighting rig could potentially follow actors. Now, I'm not. Yes, of course, we can do it in just putting our star of the show in a spot. But what I'm more interested in is whether you could then have, if you've got a company of 8, 12 actors, if they all had these transmitters, they could have little accents of light coming, not from, like, as crudely as from front of house, but maybe from side light and from the edges. And they could be a dim glimmer in a scene, but then if actor 1 and 5 came into play and doing their scene, that their lights get brighter and follow them in. And then drop down, but the other actors could also still be maybe in a blue in the background, and they might move, but they're in follow spots, as it were, but not really. It's just these accents of light on them, and I think that's really exciting, and especially having done a few shows where a lot of the scenery is projected on. There's always a challenge. So if your set is basically a big projection surface, and a projector basically is just a light throwing an image at the walls, is that there's always a conflict in terms of the light that's throwing the image at the wall, the projected image, and then the light for lighting the actors in the foreground of that image. So you have to be very careful, keep the lighting very tight, and sometimes you can do that, and that's great. But if there's a scene with 3 actors and they're all at individual corners of the stage and it's quite a mobile scene, it's quite difficult to contain the light. So perhaps this system, you could have these subtle accents of light on people in scenes. You still have some lighting in the scene, but you can keep a lot of your spill light and your ambient light, you can keep that down, but still have people popped out in subtle, essentially special lights that follow them around. So I think, yeah, automation, like the technology to allow people to have transmitters on them and the lights to follow them, as well as scenery to have transmitters on it. So maybe something goes across the stage and you want it picked out just in a pool of light. I think that's probably the next thing that I'm really excited to have a go at using.
Wow, it's extraordinary. And what about, say, when you last summer you did this incredible revival of Joseph at the London Palladium, this spectacular musical? How does that, working on something of that scale and a musical like that, differ to something like, I don't know, What the Butler Saw, a sort of, you know, a play at Curve? What are the sort of main differences between plays and musicals?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, something like Joseph is incredible to work on a scale like that, and you know, with Andrew Lloyd Webber and having his involvement in the show. I mean, it was incredibly daunting to do it, and there was a lot of pressure to make sure we got it right. But it was a, you know, it's a big, colourful, as you can imagine. I mean, the music in that show is so diverse. It's a real gift for a lighting designer to be able to light so many different styles of music and have fun with it as well, I think, because it ultimately it's a fun show. But I suppose the difference, when I start, if someone offers me a play and a musical, I think I kind of start in the same way, because ultimately both things, what is the role of lighting? Well, I think it's to help tell a story. So it's kind of the same initial approach, I would say, but obviously incredibly different, because, for example, something like What the Butler Saw is essentially in one space. And as we spoke about, something like Joseph had a few scenic elements that changed, but the lighting did a lot of the work to change it. So I guess all the rules of lighting storytelling in terms of the editorial stuff we've spoken about and location and stuff apply to both settings, but the demands of a musical, I guess, because the way that stories are told in musicals by their very nature are often considerably more heightened than you would in a play. So you know, the fact that people start singing and people dance, and it's much bigger. So I suppose lighting, just because really is going to rise to that, because as heightened as the storytelling is, well, lighting as a part of that storytelling is going to support that. So in the case of Joseph, it's going to support the fact that at one point we're doing a line dance, and in another part we're doing an Elvis rock and roll number, and then we're doing a French song, and so on and so forth. And the lighting will support those moments, you know, in the same way that perhaps the lighting would support in Breakfast at Tiffany's a moment that perhaps a train passes, so we have a flicker of light. It's both are supporting the story. In terms of the differences, I think it just depends on what the plays are, because I think we've done, actually thinking about something like Breakfast at Tiffany's, I'm sure we've sat in the technical rehearsals thinking it feels like we're doing a musical here, because I guess the idea of what a musical is probably means that there's a lot more scenes. Funnily enough, music is involved in a musical, and something like Breakfast at Tiffany's flowed very musically from scene to scene. So I suppose you can get plays like a Breakfast at Tiffany's that has a sort of a musical style to it in terms of how it's presented. But I suppose equally you could say that there are musicals that you would like as if it was like a play, for example. You know, you and I, we did The Hired Man quite a few years ago now, but you know, that wasn't a big all singing, all dancing razzmatazz musical, and I think the lighting style had perhaps more of a drama lighting style to it than something like Annie that we've done together is, you know, is much more, I suppose, Broadway. And so I suppose there's a way that you could say that plays, you get some plays that are a bit like musicals and some musicals are a bit like plays. And I guess it's the lighting's job to support whatever decision is made on that, I would say. I don't think there's a fixed, you know, the rules are the same. It just depends on where you're going with it.
Yeah, and what are your ambitions for the future? What sort of projects are you sort of looking forward to, or you know, you hope you'll sort of work on in the future? I mean, I know at this point we just want to work on any project, quite frankly, in our lockdown, hoping that
I'd love to be let out of the house. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I've kind of been really fortunate, really, in that I'm in a position where I can say I've got shows around I had shows, but will have shows around the UK, and shows in the West End. I mean, I'm working on designs that, you know, there's a musical called The Drifter's Girl, that's due to open in the West End in the autumn. And I'm really excited to be involved in, like, at the moment we're kind of working on the design of it at the stage. Myself and Anthony Ward, the set designer, are sort of exchanging ideas back and forward at the moment. So that's exciting. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that that will happen this year. And if it doesn't, for whatever reason, then it will happen next year. So, I mean, I think I'm quite fortunate actually for all of this, that a lot of the work that obviously at the moment it isn't happening, but it feels like it's all paused. So it's not, you know, there's something really exciting about the fact that, you know, when this horrible situation has done what it's done, then we can get back to it. But I think one of my big ambitions, I mean, I'm a big fan of musical theatre, and I love going to New York and, you know, seeing such variety of drama and musicals that appear on Broadway. But I think one day to have a show that transfers there, that would certainly be something that's big up on my list of wishes, I'd say. So fingers crossed one of these shows will go there one day.
Yeah, well, let's try and do a Curve show that goes to Broadway.
That would be fantastic.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And just to finish up then, Ben, you've got such a wealth of experience, and it's so inspiring hearing your journey. What advice would you have for somebody who's maybe listening into this and, you know, has ambitions to follow in the footsteps of somebody like yourself and would like to be a lighting designer? What sort of tips and advice would you have for them?
Well, I think, I mean, if you're watching this, and you must love, you know, you must love theatre, and I think, you know, see as much stuff as you can. I mean, even now, I mean, I think what I'm missing right now is I'm missing a lot of going to see shows. And so get out there, go to the National Theatre and see stuff, go to Curve and see stuff. You know, take it all in, and because you'll learn from seeing what other people do. You know, be tenacious, do what I did, is apply to your local theatre, send letters and say, look, is there any work, whether you want to be a casual technician, do you want to be part of the technical team? And then it depends. I mean, if you're at school, look at work experience options. I mean, you know, there's always opportunities out there. You know, we're fortunate we have some fantastic drama schools that run wonderful lighting design courses. So look at those as well. Just kind of get out there. I mean, it's a very exciting career. It's not an easy career, I'd say, lighting design. You've really got to love it, because you know, who wants to be in a theatre at 2 a.m. lighting a show? Well, funnily enough, actually, I want to be in a theatre at 2 o'clock lighting a show, but I'm a bit of an oddball from that point of view. So, you know that the hours are long, and it, you know, there's competition, but I think if you're someone who really loves it and you're a fighter, then keep going at it, because there is lots of opportunity.
Excellent. Ben, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time with us this morning.
Oh, it's been great. Thank you.